are we now in the scheme of things? What do you think? Is that where we are? We were going to discuss monads one more time, I remember. As a kind of
It's about space and time.
Do you want to give it a go?
Try.
Do you have something written?
Not really.
Okay. Should we just begin to set this up?
That'd
Okay.
be good.
When I say we, I mean you. What text do you want us to be looking at?
We did say the letters to Samuel Clarke and the ultimate origination of things.
Well, I'm going to do a small intro then, while you're getting yourself organized. The first question to ask yourself is, why should it matter to talk about space and or time? And why does it matter to talk about it in terms of this thing called the monad? And then, circling back on that, there's a debate about whether or not time is necessary at all. And in fact, some people argue that time in a universe that's based on quantum physics dissolves. It becomes simply a matter of speed, or a matter of distance, or a matter of energy, and therefore isn't chronological time anymore, and that chronological time becomes the conceit of how one operates in a daily environment. But in fact, it's simply because it's a convenience. It's not accurate. I mean, there's no accuracy to it. There's no truth to it. So this is the range of where one can go with this question of time. Now, in the very well-known book by Heidegger, Being and Time, Heidegger is asking or is proposing a mood that suggests that the relation between being and this entity, where one understands the movement of how something can happen, how something can be made, how something can come forth, becomes integrated. Now even Heidegger has issues around the way in which he talks about this bringing forth, this notion of Dasein and so on. So in the end, I would say that his relationship to the work Being in Time is probably the weakest of all the stuff that he's put forward, but it usually tends to be the one that everybody reads. So that's why we kind of skip Being in Time, and we go to Identity and Difference, and then later on the event, which reminds me, speaking of the word event, Lauren sends her apologies because she's ill, as is Samira, so they couldn't make it today, so they wanted to send their apologies. Okay, now, having said that, what do you think this would have in relation to the things we've been discussing? The monad, the thing called the soul, maybe transubstantiation. I'm going to always look at drop up now when I think of this word. What do you, we need to sort of locate this. Oh, hi, John. Come on in. Okay. Well, maybe we'll locate it in a minute. Ben, we just began, here, come on up here. We just began or do you have anything to say? We just began the seminar, but it would be nice for you to introduce yourself.
Okay. I don't want to take part in your whole seminar.
No. Just to
take it.
Okay. The question of the magic side of it.
Yeah.
So if you can introduce yourself, and everybody else will quickly introduce themselves,
okay.
So we'll have a sense.
All right. I'm Jivan Astfak. I'm professor at the School of Jewelry, and I've recently made director of a new research center. It's called Creative Making or STAF. And Johnny and I, because Johnny runs the CFAR Research Center for Fine Art, and we have this idea of a collaborative project, a research project with the publication. Over to Johnny.
Mm-hmm. So what we were trying to, we've set up a working committee to try and get this organized, of which your students or yourself obviously can be involved.
Well, I mean, I haven't had any conversations yet.
Right.
But I think it would probably be quite exciting for some of the students. So, however, the School of Jewelry has MA students but not PhD students, except for one who's very busy with other things. So I'm looking to you guys, as a possibility of, if any of you want to be involved. And the interesting thing is that, as I understood, Johnny, sort of like the title of this conference stroke publication, magic, alchemy, materiality, well, that's my word, transubstantiation of the senses. I have to
That's going to be the key word.
I think, I think sort of like the key words, of course, dip into all sorts of strands, historical strands, discipline strands. But goldsmithing actually comes from alchemical practices in one way or the other, and of course the alloying of metals, and the whole kind of like scientific exploration, probably originated in alchemical processes. I also happen to have a little bit of knowledge. I studied comparative religion before I came to the UK, and shamanism and things around magic were part of the things I was interested in at that time. So I also have a very particular interest in the 13th century German sorcerer, which I hope, there is a little opening of kind of like talking about some of these sources. Of course, then in German art, you have, Ansel Kiefer being very interested in some of the German alchemists and their writings and philosophy. You have some more based in Christianity, like Hildegard von Bingen, who had some very interesting ideas around alchemical processes and magic in her way of thinking. You find it in sort of like outside European traditions and all shamanistic traditions. There are some ideas around transformation of materials and transubstantiation of senses. You find it in psychoanalytical kind of approaches, that there are transformative processes that are being discussed. Philosophy, over to Johnny again.
Well, we can get into that, but what I was hoping that you might want to throw it on the table here is really how you would envision the role of the School of either Jewelry or the Center for Making, that kind of thing, in terms of, do you think that we would have something around, let's say, horology, or around, any of these kind of things that become part of your magic?
I think, the measuring of time.
The measuring of time.
Is per se, like a magic practice.
Yeah.
So I don't know if our horologists would see it that way, but,
But we do.
Yes, maybe they could be persuaded to look at it from that perspective for the purpose of a conference. But I also think of a colleague, her name is Rachel Coley, who makes
What's your name, Rachel? What?
Rachel Coley.
Okay.
Who makes gold ring, simulated gold rings. They look like biscuits, the biscuits you eat with this sort of jam core. And
Jammy
the jam,
Dodger.
yes.
What's it called?
Jammy Dodger.
Jammy Dodgers, yes. And the core, the jelly is printed, it's printed with blood. So, that there's a lot of stuff in there of changing values, really, and how this can be ultimately interpreted. So, this is just one example. So I think probably there would be a kind of like a little bit of a searching for people who do something in a variety of art practices that relates to the title, that we would find exciting and want to know more about. I also think, because I don't know you individually, I don't know what your PhD
We're just going to do it a very quick run.
projects are, because maybe it needs to relate as well to some of the things you're looking at.
And also some of your research, I think, that is involved, or something that you might want to start at the center for making. Like if that wraps it any of the
My mind
strands.
is generally about narrative structures in objects and how we come to invest these sort of narrative structures, A, and B, how we construct interpretation of when we perceive an object. So narrativity is my thing, and so if you like, alchemy is a story, and so I could approach an object with that story in mind and see what one would find. There's a chemical here. So actually, it's, if you start having this sort of like, my research director of research once called it the research methodology of paranoia. When you start to see it everywhere.
Yeah.
So,
That could be an interesting strand within the conference call. Because what we're going to do is, there's a working group, who will announce themselves as we go around, who are writing the call right now. As soon as we get some version of it, then they'll send it to me and I'll send it to you, and we'll also work on it, then we'll send it back to the group, and then we'll get it out, because we wanted the abstracts and whatever in by the 31st of March. So fairly, because we want the conference to be on at the end of May, 29th and 30th of May. Is that
advice caution?
Yes.
That's tough.
It's tight. We can do it.
Do we have to?
Well, I think
What's the reason why so pressurized?
because the money has to be spent.
Okay, fair enough. Point again. Yes.
That's easy.
Yes.
Okay. So why don't we just go around? If you don't mind introducing yourself, just turn to Yvonne. Dane, we'll start with you.
I'm Dane, I'm a PhD student here. I'm the CFAR research assistant, and my research is on time technology and systems related approach to dealing with contemporary art.
My name's Andre, I'm actually on the MA. This week I'm gilding photographs. I've been conscripted into the working group today. I have no idea what's going on, so I'll get the lowdown from Dane and Sophie and Grace.
There must be a
after
reason
this.
why you're here.
I'm Grace, I'm a second year PhD practice led, and I'm looking at women in the supernatural, particularly photographs of women producing ectoplasm.
Oh right, okay. That's how I lost my book allowance, was my father, because I book on
Because you did what?
Actually true.
You practiced
Not making this
ectoplasm?
up.
Say that again?
I had a book allowance when I was a teenager, and I bought a book on ectoplasm. My father cancelled my book allowance.
Really? It was too much. It was a step too far.
Completely.
Wow. Do you still have the book?
Sorry, we have to have a talk about it.
That's great.
I'm Jakub, and I'm a PhD student, and I am responsible for the event part of this conference, as a practical part of this conference, or yeah, let's call it that way for now. And I'm doing my PhD in the palimpsest, and what it means to be palimpsestos.
Palimpsestos.
That's the word. There is a word palimpsestos. Not palimpsestic. Palimpsestic. It's palimpsestos. Palimpsestos. There is a word like that.
It's called palimpsestrous?
Yes, it should be palimpsestic as a kind of
Palimpsestic, yeah, right,
grammatic word.
Yes.
But it was actually, I discovered recently, I started reading a book called The Palimpsest, and there is actually palimpsestos to involve the sensuousness of palimpsest.
But not incest, Church.
No.
No, you don't think so. Wow.
That's for now. That's for now. It's a good book though.
Thank you. It's wonderful.
Hi, I'm Mark. I'm a research fellow here, postdoc research fellow here. Philosopher, interested in, say, religion, science, mysticism, and metaphysics.
Wow, there's a lot of mystic interest here.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, John.
Joanne and I know each other very well. We work together.
Okay.
She thinks she doesn't have to introduce
No, you have to introduce yourself. You have to say why you're here. Yes,
Yes, the others
absolutely.
want to know this maybe, or have you?
Yeah,
I
no,
won't
no.
do that. Okay,
No, do it
my,
again.
my name is Tony. I'm at the beginning of applying for a PhD. Mattia is my mentor, and I'm looking at remembrance. I'll just leave it at that for now. And I've just secured my Director of Studies today, so that's very cool. So I can now move forward onto the next stage.
Right.
I'm Tamsin. I'm on the MA Fine Art part-time, and I've been looking at dissolving and the erotic and the divine beloved and the sea, and I've been filming things that I've been throwing in the sea.
And one of them has been a wedding dress that looks remarkably like a wave, and all the textures and the colors. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I'm Gay Place, a quiet piece of work in progress. I'm a newly enrolled PhD student, just started, so not quite sure where I'm going yet, but I'm here.
Yes. What is your research on?
It's about identity and the notions of identity within contemporary art and looking at materiality and how it's represented through that.
Materiality.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just clicking. I'm just
Good.
keywords.
Good. Yeah, that's good. Although materiality is actually not one of the words in the title at the moment. It was Twice Upon a Time, Alchemy, Magic, and the Transubstantiation of the Senses.
Yeah. But the earlier conversation.
I know, the earlier conversation was on material. I was voted down on that one by somebody. I know, you actually supported the material one, didn't you? For a moment. Okay, Alberto.
Hello, my name is Alberto. I'm a PhD student. I'm a painter, and I'm gonna work mostly with pattern superposition. For this reason, I went today to the textile department, finding out what can I actually do with their facilities. I'm pretty excited about that possibility.
Did you work on fabric or?
I think I'm gonna do some works on silk. Do you
On
need to
silk?
explain why?
Yeah. Just the whole thing about the vision that you're doing, the notion of vision.
Yeah, I'm gonna work on focus and out of focus as a means for giving a sense of depth and spatiality. So I found out that if I'm working with a digital printing machine, I can probably work better with the focus and out of focus, even in a small scale. At the moment, I don't want to make huge works because I'm at the beginning time.
That's good.
My name is Mattia. I am a PhD student.
So what are you working on today?
Student, artist, mix of things. I am working around dimension and dimensionality, trying to figure out how time or temporalities must be understood in the process of emergence right from artistic creation, so that one can subtract artistic creation from the hierarchy imposed upon it by representation. And I am aiming at finding a point where aesthetic and epistemology are completely blurred, and then they articulate themselves in the process of making the senses settle.
And when you make, you paint or?
No, my work is very ephemeral. I used participation-based practice as a material in itself, but I'm more interested in logics of possibility of what's the word in English? Reconciliation, which never closes entirely. So reconcilability of what is incommensurable is what attracts me. I can't actually lay my hands on anything and try to work it out. That's what I am.
And he's also the arts manager for Satisas.
Yes.
And he's also part of the working group, as is Grace and Jakob and Dane. And well, and the rest of them, part of the
They
group.
all have jobs.
They all have jobs within our little conference thing. Yes, right. Okay.
Hi, Stuart. I'm on the Fine Arts MA part-time, which is going towards the end of that. I've also got an application going through the HRC. It's a machine at the moment. A British landscape romantic tradition, ecosophy, and the digital. That's the key words.
That's key words.
Okay.
Yeah.
Turner and
Turner,
Constable.
the hashtag.
Turner hashtag digital.
Well, hashtags in there somewhere.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
I'm Kate Katafiash. I'm senior lecturer in drama at Newman University and I sort of interlope post-doctoral. Very interested in performance philosophy. Plays Redwood Bond, the way that he radicalises the relationship between time and space by using ghosts and people becoming walls and dummies that are dead and dummy actors that are still alive, things like that.
Ghosts.
That's quite, yeah, good.
Hi, I'm Rita. I've recently just finished my MA in the history of art design. I was looking at a mixture of different things involving the supernatural and witchcraft, and I'd like to now take that on to
Wow, this is
a
quite
higher level
strong.
for hopefully progress up to.
Actually, we're all practicing voodoo and
Yeah, we're all
Yeah,
witches.
that's a witch.
Who knew?
We're all witches.
Yeah, that's right. Or witches in training. Wits. Yes, go on, sorry, Pamrita, I didn't
No,
mean to interrupt.
that was it. I just said I'd now like to take that.
And how did you get interested in this?
I've always had an interest for it. I did a little bit of work on it when I was doing my BA, but the MA allowed me to look into it in greater detail and in the way I wanted to, and hopefully the PhD will as well.
Yes, well, better, saying that's
Better,
what it's
so,
about.
yeah.
Yes, good,
Definitely.
good.
I'm Jacqueline. I'm a postdoc researcher at Parkside. You've probably seen me in the office.
She
my
just
research-
finished.
Yeah, my research explored non-representational articulations of subjectivity in painting, drawing on the poetic dimensions of language in relation to materiality, the heat of making, and I'd say my art practice is sort of alchemical explorations of paint, so pigmented glass, wax, sort of sculptural, installational, spatial type things.
I'm Sophie. I'm doing an MA in Media Arts philosophy at Johnny. I use film, light, colour, and movement. I use sort of dance, and I sort of map. I've just got onto PhD, and I'm sort of mapping the curve of the transforming body. That's sort of kind of what I'm doing.
Well, yes, but wouldn't you say that it's actually looking at the young girl's body?
Yeah, always, yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
how
a young
that-
female body from a kind of feminine point of view. And so, in my film work also I'm kind of interested in some ways of seeing and the ways that the viewer sees you as well, and playing with those ideas. I use a lot of layering in my work, so it's kind of multi-dimensional. I like using mapping that is sort of has no edges, and so yeah, I'm just playing with all those things.
Be curious to see.
This is one of her pieces here, and in fact the bodice.
Oh, the photograph.
not the
No, the
photograph,
finger,
no.
that
Oh,
finger
the
that
finger,
lights up, and that bodice lights up as well. I put a battery in it actually, Johnny. You
Oh,
can
did
turn
you?
it on, yeah.
Oh, can you turn it on? I'll go to.
It's got a switch
Good
on
luck.
the side. It's done to a heartbeat, this one, so it's got a heartbeat sensor. But I tend to, it's a switch.
Sorry, this is the test. If you can do this, you can get your PhD. Okay. And so when the person who's wearing this dances, light comes out.
Yeah, I subtract the arcs of the
Can we do
light
it?
and
Put the big light. Yeah, we can put the lights up. Normally we do this in the dark. That's right. Sorry. Here we go.
Andre's had enough, he's seen it.
That's
too many
right.
times.
It's not quite doing that.
You don't have to shake it. It's sort of
In fact, don't shake it is actually what she's saying.
I don't shake it.
That's right.
I got legs to shake it.
No, it's got a sensor that's
Sensor,
it's got
okay.
a sensor that's set to a heartbeat, but at the moment I've got to sort of configure it a bit more so that the see that RGB that's going on?
Yeah.
I'm going to put a sensor in so that a temperature sensor, so that when the dancer wears it, it will change colour as they move, so that as they heat up, it will go through all different colours. I need the other battery actually. You know the one that I left in the library tour thing? Do we get those back?
We will begin this seminar. we'll discuss that later.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And last of all, Lee Hewitt, a researcher in finance.
At CFAR.
At CFAR, of course, yes. And recently designer of All Futures Adhesives and article press books. Also an artist, worked mostly in textiles and colour forms, do lots of large installations.
Can you explain one of your major commissions, one of your major recent commissions?
So I've just got a phone call.
You are right,
honestly.
I know, but it's for my okay.
Agent.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
That was really hard for him.
Recent one. Okay, I just finished one in. It's a research centre just outside Cambridge called Schlumberger. It was a large, I think it's about 2 metre diameter piece of work that sat on a wall in their main entrance, I guess. So I do a lot of public kind of commissions for buildings, most probably.
Does this mean you just lost 40,000 pounds or something when you're trying to get a hold of you?
It's a fashion.
No, it's in this respect. They do a lot of drilling, but also do a lot of research into renewable energy and power.
All right.
And various other things. It's a building just outside. It's a research facility just outside Cambridge. It's a rather beautiful building, all kind of tented. It's amazing. Anyone should look it up. But I can't remember the architect off the top of my head.
Was it Farrell? Is it Farrell or when it's just been on that programme?
Yeah, it's
the artist that built Britain or whatever it's for Farrell or one of those. Yeah.
I don't know actually.
Yeah,
But it's kind of 2 large buildings with a giant tented structure over the top. But I've just done a large circular piece of work which consisted of about 2,000 felt balls, which are bright yellow, very, very intense cadmium yellow on the outside, and they veer straight into a white to the very centre, and that kind of concaves inwards by about 2 foot. So
maybe one of your pieces we could have for the conference.
If we've got any left, yeah, well, I can make one. Yeah, I don't mind.
There you go. You don't mind? That's like, whatever.
Well, you know,
you sure you're not a New Yorker?
Do you know what? I like making work. It's fine.
Really?
Yeah.
That's great. That's what I'll talk to Jakob. He's the making events person here. Okay, great. Okay, does that give you a bit of information?
It's wonderful, very rich.
Good.
Yeah,
If
and
we
I
have a
can
good
see
group.
how you came up with this topic. So it's a lot of shared interest. But what I don't, or what you haven't said, or you haven't been asked, is like what you wish to get out of a conference like this. Of course, I mean, Johnny and I will have a bit of an agenda, but but I think it's also important to hear what you would like to get out of a day or two. I don't know, 1 day, 2 days.
It's a day and a half.
A day and a half, and a publication. What you would get out of it. I don't know if you have discussed of like who is actively participating. Obviously.
Well, we're putting the call out. There's some students that have been coming forward who are musicians, composers, and that Jakob has been sort of organizing on one level. But we'll put the formal call out in the next couple of days with the view of having people respond So we'll get a bigger sense of
Okay.
who really will be speaking, and in court, obviously, if you know anybody you'd like to have speaking, don't hold back. And Dane is our point person for that, to send anything, Dane Warrella, but I'll send you the
Yeah,
emails.
okay, yeah. So, reverse. And probably also, you know, maybe some of you think like, okay, that's a group decision, but maybe it's not for me. Then, you know, I guess it's fair enough to say, well, you know, I just watch or observe. But then I think those people who actually formulated something in connection with it, I would like to hear what they wish to get out of it. Wish that was you. Before you came.
Can you start something else, because I really didn't listen to what you were saying.
I tell you, why don't we start with Mattia?
I was thinking
What I was going to say
Sorry.
is, to be honest with you, the thing that we have to think about here is not so much to cut off this part of the debate, but part of it is just now growing.
Oh, I
So
see.
people are just trying to hear what could conceivably happen. That's why we wanted you to come here, so that you, if you thought there was something, including everybody else, that you wanted to include in this, in how it would look. Like, for example, one of the things that we're going to end up doing is sawing Grace in half. One of David Cheeseman will be the sawer and half person for the box. And so there's relation with illusion and transformation and this kind of thing. So that is going to be a part that Grace, you would come up with. Obviously, we'll have ectoplasm happening.
Happening.
Yes, happening. In fact, there'll be a seance as one of the. What would you like to see happen with this?
I don't know what I'd like to see happen. I mean, for me, this is a great opportunity and occasion to try out in public what I am working on. Writing or speaking to it is a great exercise. So that's it's not an utilitarian way of approaching it. The fact that it is twice upon the time, temporality is interesting for me.
And would you think that, for example, like if it is participatory practice, that like somebody goes in, does something with you, goes out a different person? Is that?
No, not at all. I mean, actually, my approach to participatory practice is that it is a dream or a dialogue that is never succeeding.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But at the same time, I find that I really want to develop some questions around, in this case in particular, what I was thinking of, is the notion of squaring a number, the power of 2, and feedback loop. If sawing cake in half, making something become something else, joining or dividing, and the idea of applying something to itself is also.
And that is visualized?
No, that would be.
How do you do it then?
Proper paper presentable.
Okay,
But I mean, there'll be things analogous to it, like, for example, sawing in half, or other things that will be augmenting this. So it's not just either a paper or it'll be kind of this DNA. Hopefully, that's what you mean, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, we can do this, but we have to go into the PhD thing.
Yeah, it was your invitation.
I know, it's bad. But, well, what else would people like to say about this? Because then.
Well, I get paid.
Yes, why don't you say something?
I'm
Yeah.
actually working for it.
Yeah?
It's
Yes.
actually practice. It's a professional practice for me. This whole event
Okay.
somehow. Also for me, it's testing as well as Matthias. I have a project I've been working on for the last few months. I haven't had the opportunity to actually try it, and it's very important for my PhD for it to happen, for my drag queen self to come out and actually do some knowledge stuff, and that moment is important, and this becomes a platform for it to actually kind of become something, try it out and see if I can actually use it for my research. What else? Well, working with people, that's always good. You know, you build up the contacts. That is I know what happened after Virgin Photography, kind of the publication after it, the papers that were submitted to it. I used them in my research later on, or kind of at least as somewhat as a footnote or somewhat as just accessible knowledge, and it's day-to-day happening. So you get a publication and you use it straight away after you don't wait 20 years for something to develop into something bigger. You actually get fresh cookies. You can pick them up and you can eat them and make something out of it, and then respond to it. And it's, yeah, I think that's what it's mostly a professional. That's why I'm really excited to have a lot of practitioners taking part in it. Johnny mentioned that this morning.
Yeah, for me as well.
This moment of we don't have to stay on the platform and do a paper. You know, this is so much more important, especially for practice-led PhD students. That's what we're trying to do. Say that our practice is as much valuable as the written work, and that is proof to it. You know, that is actually another version of it.
So it's a sort of like a day festival, is that right?
That's the thing. We're trying to combine everything what we know and what we want for the conference to be into like one thing.
And have a few speakers, well, not speakers.
There's going to be a speakers at all, but for example, we have Grace who probably deliver her paper from Vanishing Bogs. You know, so there's a combination of the actual practice becomes a speech. We have. I can imagine Matthias doing something as well, much more as he called participant. Can't pronounce words. This thing, that's going to be part of his performance. His actual writing thesis is practical work as well. It's not just it's writing. It's weirdly actual art practice for him in a way. And I would love to develop. Sorry?
Well remembered, yes.
Yeah, I do remember. Listen, I know I look like I don't, but I do.
I've given a paper before, and it was a paper, but it was a 10-foot long scroll of paper, and it was painting, and it was, but it was like a performative poetic reading. That's the sort of thing I'd be quite interested in doing. So it's still rigorous academic, but it's the materiality of what we were talking about is embodied in the performance and the thing.
Yeah. Something actually happening, not just being written down as a theory, but the actual physicality of.
And Tony is bringing a goldsmithing bench.
I can do, yeah.
And working with some fire.
I can do that.
That's brilliant.
Only on the Thursday. I'm at my dad's wedding on the Friday, so. But yeah, I can do that.
I think for me what's really exciting is the collaboration side as well, because we're working with, this was linked it to Dallas, and I'm doing an installation with one of the musicians, and Natalia who does textiles as well, so we're going to do sort of film and feedback through them, sort of performance and things, so it's kind of a whole mixture of different things, which is really exciting. We're hoping to do it then, but it might just be a film of it, but I quite want to use the building as well, like film through the bricks, because I think that would be quite ghostly as well, like you just notice the film on them coming through.
What do you mean film through the bricks?
You know, the project through the glass bricks.
Oh, right, okay, right.
So, I've been thinking about that for ages, so you could just direct a projector right through and like just see something different. It just catch your eye occasionally, like, just have little movements on it.
Yeah, the idea is to use the whole building. Also, there's this cafe that's opened up called Pure Bar and Food, I think, something like that. It's on the corner as you go toward Victoria Square. And they've opened up their environment so that we can also have some sort of link there, so we can expand as much as possible. And maybe it's possible to have something at the school, a jewelry.
Yes, of course. I mean, we have a fantastic lecture theatre which only takes 80 people. So I don't know if this is too small, or I don't know how big you're thinking. So, but that's certainly possible. So, I mean, the thing I mean, Rachel with her blood biscuits, and she turns and makes jewelry. I wanted to talk about the Agrippa von Nettesheim, somebody who developed sort of angel seals and demon seals, which are part of kind of like the history of development of talisman and thinking around talisman. So, because this is a very particular thing in jewelry which is slightly repressed. We don't do these sort of things anymore, but I would like to talk about talisman, and maybe also looking at some sort of pieces of jewelry that have talismanic qualities today, as like inherited pieces of jewelry or things that connect you with something in a very specific way. And on the basis that I think we still have this middle-aged primitive thing going on.
That's very interesting. So that could be one of the strands, the talisman.
Yeah, I think it could be. I mean, for the jewelers, obviously, it's the obvious one, because that just it clicks immediately. And then, working with fire and working with metal, that's a direct chemical sort of practice. I mean, to work with fire and metal and chemicals is too dangerous. Present days health and safety regulations would not allow us to do, but we all have experience of it, one way or the other. But I would not want to do this to happen. But, something, performance making in the School of Jewelry could happen if, we find other people that would want to be part of it. So the whole kind of thing, I mean, the school, the melting processes, casting processes, the the super high-tech electroforming studio, it's per se a direct chemical process that we use all the time. It's just that we don't call it alchemical anymore, we have other kind of ways of talking about it.
Do you think it'd be possible maybe next Wednesday, that if this group could, before the seminar, take a tour of the jewelry, the School of Jewelry? Because I think that how many people have not been to the School of Jewelry? Most people here have not been in the School of Jewelry.
Yeah, I think definitely, I mean, if Tony, I don't know, I don't want to decide for Tony, but if Tony wants to do this, I have to be in a postgraduate forum on next Wednesday.
All right, yeah.
And then I have to go back to London to catch a flight Thursday morning. Okay. But generally speaking, that would be really,
maybe
really
the
good
following
if you guys
Wednesday or
do
something.
that.
I mean, I'm just thinking that it would be good to visually take
to
in
see it,
the smells, the
Yes.
whole space, and also the school is stunning. It's really a very beautiful.
I'd be really happy to do a tour on the 19th.
On the 19th.
Yeah, so not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after.
Would people be able to do
On the
that?
19th, Simon Bolton is coming to the School of Jewelry. If this tour for you guys is in a later afternoon, then that would be doable.
Yeah, that
So
would be great.
around 4, Tony, is that too late for you?
It can't be 4 because that's the.
No, it could be 3.
3.
Four, well, actually,
Could
no,
it be
we
like
need
2?
two.
Could it be like
Couldn't
2?
you do the PhD seminar over there?
We could do the PhD seminar
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Is that
Book a room,
possible?
though, we-
I think it's possible.
Can you bring the camera then? Okay. Sure, let's do it then.
So what time?
So if we meet at the School of Jewelry at 3,
Yeah.
and then, that's great.
The lecture theatre, check it, and the lecture theatre should be free then. Really. Tony and I will check.
It's not, what's the street that's on? Victoria Street, yeah.
Yeah, in the jewelry quarter.
Do you know the postal code?
B1,
3PA.
3PA.
B1 3PA.
Victoria's is not like the Queen, but it's 17.
Yeah, Vittoria, Victoria. That's great. It's exciting. Yeah, good.
Shall I leave you?
Okay, unless you want to have a discussion on time and monads.
On time on?
Time and monads. That's what we're doing right now. Leibniz.
No.
Siobhan, thanks for coming in.
Yeah,
Really
thank you for
appreciate it.
inviting me. I hope we have a fantastic time preparing for it and having it.
Yeah, might as well.
All right.
See you later.
Nice meeting you all.
Bye. Yeah.
Bye.
I think that it sounds like it'll be quite enriching, and it's lovely that we're going to make this kind of link. Yeah, you really do. Yeah, it's true. It's very true. Okay, let's try this again. So, when we think about the concept time, immediately should come into mind a sense of a flow and a sense of marking. And so already in the concept of time, even linear time, in fact, especially any form of time, there's always already going on a flow and a segment. And that what becomes at issue is, again, this sort of question of how one deals with the space of the present. because the present as a notion of time and the way in which that time presents itself. So immediately on this sort of horizon of mark and flow, one also has, and that's a double that's going on. One also has this notion of being able to come forward, being able to come forth, to use a Heideggerian phrase, to be able to have something come to the surface, which implies that something else doesn't come to the surface. So some people will think about revealing, concealing relationships, already sort of part of this question called time. Others will see that one can never be part of the presencing of time, the actual act of it becoming present, in which case it's always something one is heading toward, trying to grasp. This is like a Zizek position, the going after the notion that you want to grab time, but as soon as you get to the present, it slips away, in which case one is then asked to move into a rethink of representation. And so that's where this notion starts coming in, this question of how something gets represented, how something in the representation of its being is in fact a series of assemblages or a series of signs. And in fact, one of the books that Dane very kindly brought down is on magic. Can you just open that up to, is this your book?
Yeah.
So in this book, which I only had about 2 seconds to look at, it is a fascinating table of signs, really.
Yeah, it's basically you have, in magic you have references to everything, so every planet has a reference and meaning, but they have millions and one meanings, and to create a table that you can reference to basically. For magicians or people who practice, and I'm being actually practice Wiccan religion and all that, this book is very important because that's for them everything. That's the source of knowledge in a way. There's simple reference knowledge. As in today is Saturday, that means this angel looks over this part of the world, that because of that part of the world I have butterfly in front of me. The connections are quite ridiculous, including devils, not devils, Satans, not Satans. Brilliant. So funny. But yeah.
Yes, go on, sorry.
Oh no. So
No,
so you
go on.
have this reference, and you have between religions, different grimoires, different religions, different natural magic, the pagan religions, the Kabbalah, Tree of Life. What else is? Well, yeah, everything that is considered as magic way.
Everything that can, and what do you think, I mean, not that we're going to have a discussion on magic, but just to put on the table, why would something be called magic? Because we were talking about representation, so suddenly we've gotten into the word magic. Yeah, Tony?
Because for a number of reasons actually, but otherworldly, unexplainable.
So if it is explainable, then it's not magic. Is that the idea? Are we willing to take that on?
Well, not really, because magic is explained. You know, the crescent of the moon was explained, and the sunrise in Greek mythology was explained by the horses and the chariot. Yeah. That was that. Yeah. So it was explained. It was. We could say this is a magic. Yeah, the chariot on fire, that is the sun, and that's the magic. But it was explained. So it is an explanation. I would say it's the other explanation.
So that's where we're getting with this. So you can understand perhaps that this notion of representation can be tied up with the question of time as in present, but it also can be tied up with the question of magic. And that's where we're going to start to unravel certain things that we're going to discuss on the ontology of how Leibniz is speaking about this space-time. And we'll move from that in a minute. Now, the other thing that just to mark around this kind of table that Jakob is pointing out is the way in which the notion of element plays. So we started the whole seminar back in January, questioning the periodic table, the chemical table. And the weird thing about a table is that it presents itself as a translation. It presents itself as a way to go from point A to B, so that it's like a Rosetta Stone in some ways. So this is also another layer into this question of time here: presentation, representation, representation. Because what's also being played with is the fact that you could have a table that is saying that it's explaining something. It's saying that it's a tablet to make connections. So if the connections to which it's referring are unreal, or are not real, or are differently real, where does that leave us? And with the chemical periodic table, which we know is, quote, real, when it was first presented, was it real? And so on and so forth. So where do we move between real and not real? Is there like a continuum between real and not real? Is that continuum a spatial continuum? Or is it a temporal continuum? Or is it both? Or is it something else altogether? And that's what that's why Leibniz becomes very important for this move that starts to talk about, the monad, famous monad, which we'll get before the end of this day. It's something that you need to get a sense of all the little nuances that start coming into the picture here. And indeed, the picture itself, and what it is to have a picture, and how a picture can become an ontology. So now on the table, we've got the question of flow, or let's say duration. We have the question of marker, or let's say segment. We have the question of representation, which is to say something stands in for something. Or we have the question of representation, which is to say an assemblage. We have the question that something that is being represented could in fact be true, or could not be true at all. So what is being represented? And if truth is always at the level of a changing entity, which is the base of the Enlightenment, then you have another whole layer going on. Now, Nietzsche picks up on this very specifically in his work called Daybreak. And it's an underread work of his, which is worth taking a look at, where he really gets into the question of what happens when when everything is read as a temptation, when the wind blows and that's read a certain way, or tea leaves, or everywhere you turn there's some sort of meaning. And how does that actually stay with us today? And anyway, what do we mean by this thing called today? So I don't know if that's given you enough of a semblance to move into what you were going to say. Yeah, okay, so why don't you, what do you want us to look at? What is the piece?
It's a selection of letters that Leibniz wrote to Samuel Clarke in between 1715 and 1716. They're the last things he ever wrote, basically. Samuel Clarke was a friend of Newton's, who obviously Leibniz clashed with in the papers.
Yes.
Obviously, so Leibniz responding to Clarke is not very friendly at times.
That's funny.
And yeah, these are the last things Leibniz ever wrote. I think he died about 2 weeks after he wrote his fifth letter. So,
Leibniz did.
So he never replied to Clarke's fifth one. But he's making a stand against Newtonian classical physics notion of space, time, God, the universe, how they just don't really match up to Leibniz's thought on those things.
And what was the basic position? What was his basic attack on the Newtonian notion of space?
Well, in Newtonian physics, space is absolute and it's independent of any bodies. It has a uniformity across it. It's not affected by the bodies in it. It doesn't react to them. It's just a platform for them, a ground for them to move across, in, through. And Leibniz's argument is that
Yes, that's good. Anybody else want to jump in? There, I will paraphrase part of this. There's a very interesting piece by a very conservative writer, scholar, named Karl Popper, P-O-P-P-E-R, Karl with a K, called Of Clouds and Clocks. It's very famous, it was, I think in the 60s, maybe it was 50s even, probably. Anyway, what he basically argues is that often people have the sense of space as either being like a cloud, like a sort of this kind of like ephemeral, gassy type thing, or this kind of platform that you're talking about. And with it, the notion of time is either something that is like a clock, tick, 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 or it's something that doesn't exist at all. So he starts looking at this relationship between space and time. Now the question becomes, in the letters between Clarke and Leibniz, the question becomes, if you think that time is always moving, does that mean that space has to remain the same? This is the basic position, yes. And in fact, the early work of Heidegger makes the same claim. That's why he rejects being in time later on. If, in fact, space also moves, A, how does it move? Where does it move? What happens with this thing called the where? Because isn't that a spatial term? And so they start shifting. Time starts to become duration. Duration starts to become a flow starts to become something that moves from within space, and in fact becomes space. Space becomes the flow. So space is not outside of time, it is time. Or time is not on top of space, it is the space. And this becomes the basis of the Einsteinian move in the end. This is where you get the move between the notion of light year, for example. That's time, but it's actually a whole movement. Go on. Did you regain your train of thought then?
I think so.
Okay.
Well, Newton's argument was that space-time are absolutely independent of any bodies within them. But Leibniz's argument is, on the contrary, to say that there is no space or time without the bodies, because space and time exist as a relation between bodies, as an order between bodies, or monads specifically.
Right, okay, so now the famous monad comes in. So let's make sure we're all on the same page here. So if space is a movable feast, and if time doesn't exist, or maybe let's say it doesn't, let's use example A. Let's say time exists and space exists. Give me, how do you understand that? How does, give it a go. How do you understand that?
I can say how I try not to understand it because it's a tricky position to be.
Okay, how do you try
I try not to
understand?
understand it as a laid out stage with this arrow of time scrolling through.
Okay.
And it is very difficult because it is our culture and it works thinking like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if one looks at it and contemplates it quite a bit, we realize that the whole concept can be turned inside out and say our notion of space and time is precisely a set of relations. So, for example, if one understands space as pre-existing the object of time, then one can ask is space finite or infinite? If it is a set of relation, that question no longer applies because as long as there is a new instance or a new object, then obviously space extends over to that new instance, the object. And that immediately goes to the whole logic of identity and
difference.
And difference because any identity can expand and only works upon
Okay, so let's try it again. Okay, let's put it back on the table, this question of, we've got representation, we've got presentation, we've got assemblage. Now, are any of these things that I'm mentioning, are they spatial references, temporal references, or both, or neither? Let's just pick one. Which one would you like, Sophie, which one are you going to talk about?
Well, time is both, really, isn't it?
Time is both what?
Spatial and temporal.
Explain how you mean that.
Well, when I was reading Einstein's theory of relativity, he explains it really well by saying that if you drop, if somebody's in a train and they drop something onto the platform, then it's a straight line, but the person on the platform sees it as a parabola. So who's seen it right, who's actually seen it as a straight line or a curve, is in relation to space and
where they are in the position of the
exactly
throw.
time, space, and relativity. So they're all relational. But also I think there can be several times at once in this expression.
There can be several times at once, right? So getting warmer to this notion of how time can be sort of multiple time, but also the only thing to be cautious about with the Einstein example there, which Bergson reads incorrectly, and I want to make sure nobody else does, which is that when one talks about relativity, or when one talks about Einstein's version of relativity, he doesn't mean anything goes within a field of vision, perceptual vision. He means that in any given statement, the variables that connect it can be shifted depending on its ability to create that statement.
Yeah.
And that's what's relative. So to put it slightly differently, because that sounds absolutely incomprehensible, I was at this conference on Friday. It was on the photography in the archive, and I was explaining A equals A, the famous A equals A, which is like knife in the head now at this point. It was like, again. So A is connected to A, that link, that thing that makes it belong. I was arguing in the paper that is the archive. That is precisely what an archive does when it is alive, when it's doing something living, when it's doing something that could work. It brings these things, it makes things belong in this kind of way, but it isn't itself the belonging. So it does this thing. Now that it could have anything in the archive that makes up the archive. That's the relativity. The fact that they are able to pull things together in this way, create, and also at the same time have a distance, is this way in which relativity is operating. Does that make sense? Am I, Alberto, what are you hearing here?
Nothing.
I maybe focus on the fact that I would like to close the window.
Okay, close the window. Okay, are you freezing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Please don't drop the picture behind it. In front of
Could you also switch the lights on? Okay.
it. That's fine. Everybody else, any other questions?
Oh, right.
The other one too.
What about the other one?
Yeah, it's the same, but it's the other switch.
It's the same but different, yeah.
Okay, that was
That's it.
confusing.
Yeah. Okay, everybody back to life. We've got everybody back. This is the most bizarre class today. But anyway, we'll try and...
Can I add something to this, or take it from a different angle? The reason why Leibniz rejects Newton's concept of space is precisely based on the principle of non-contradiction, the A equals A, then therefore A be different than not A. He is saying that if space is something that exists a priori, as something that is laid out before, as a stage before anything happens on it, and before the object is populated, then it is completely neutral, acceptable. Therefore, any point is equal to any other point.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it would be in contradiction with the basic principle of logic, which says that only one thing is equal to A, which is A itself, and everything that is different than A, all non-A's, are something else. Then they have to have some element that differentiates them. They cannot be equal but different. They cannot have all the same description and yet not be the same thing.
Right.
So
Did everybody get that? Are you following this? Because it's tough. Okay.
So he says that in Newtonian, the Newtonian understanding of space, this absolutely neutral grid of coordinates, not depth, width, height, with nothing else attached to it, there is precisely this problem. And therefore there would be no reason why an object is in one place or in another, why the world is distributed in one way or another. And therefore it is not a logically sound paradigm or a logically sound image of space to be used. And equally for time, it is the same. It says that there would be no reason.
Who has understood just this sentence? What?
Not yet.
Not yet. Try it again, because I look at my people and I see a glazed look. So I want to make sure that you're actually hearing what is being said. I say this very respectfully, but it's very tough.
Okay.
So try it again. So what is the problem, and why, and how are you solving it? Or how are you, stroke Leibniz, solving it?
Okay, Leibniz uses the principle of non-contradiction as the basic principle for thinking.
And what is the principle of non-contradiction?
The principle of non-contradiction is that it is impossible to have two objects or two instances that are entirely the same in their description, and yet they are different.
So the short version of that is attacking a Hegelian move. The Hegelian move bases reality precisely on contradiction. All that there is plus all that there's not. So if you have this side being the thesis, then the antithesis is exactly the same, but on the other side, as it were, and therefore completely different. And so that's the first position of Leibniz. He's making the claim that that is simply not the case, that you cannot have the whole of reality situated in the logic of contradiction. And that if you take that as the beginning of your picture, you will be forever with the wrong picture. And so he says that the only way to understand reality is through the theory of non-contradiction. Take it away.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, right?
Yes.
Okay, so.
What was that? So so no object can have exactly the same description as another object, and yet not being the same object.
So thesis, antithesis cannot exist in the same way. So how do we get the whole of reality if we can't use the basic sort of move of totalizing the universe, as it were? How does that happen? How does he come up with reality?
Well, these are two different developments of the same. I stay with space for a moment, then I can get back there. He comes up with reality because it's infinitesimal subdivision of things, so that's what permits him to live within the extremes of the non-contradiction.
Did you hear what Mattia just said? Say it again, because you said it very quickly.
Reality, in my understanding, reality can exist precisely because between these absolute opposites of the fact that something is, and there cannot be something that is exactly like that and yet be different, there is an infinitesimal possibility of subdivisions.
Okay, so just try and remember the way in which something can be broken up and segmented or marked, which should bring you back to this notion of time we were just talking about before. It can be marked, it can be assembled, so that if you look at this piece of paper, you have thesis on the one side and antithesis on the other side, and if you stretch this paper this way, everything follows. And what we know, for example, that this side is never on that side. So how does Leibniz explain that comment? Sophie? I don't know. Okay?
Is that the bit where he says everything doesn't, there's gaps, there's spaces between everything anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so nothing is really complete, so they sort of move around each other?
Yes.
Sort of, but that's as far as I've got with
That's
it.
not bad. That's not bad. Alberto, whatever you are. No? You're innocent? Okay. Anybody else want to be called on and picked on and yes, Tony? Oh. Moved. Stuart?
Not at the moment.
Is this just too horribly, annoyingly difficult? Because it is not actually as difficult as it's sounding. So the fact that it's sounding too difficult.
Well, I sort of thought I was understanding it when they were talking about how things can just keep on being broken down, that there was space in things. But then I got really confused because I was reading the letters, and then I thought, well, ultimately you have the monad. And that's where I got confused, because if you can keep breaking things down into smaller and smaller sections, but you still have the monad that can't be broken down, and I just couldn't reconcile the two sort of ways I was thinking about it.
That's
And
brilliant, though.
That was my...
Something fell on your head.
No,
No.
my glasses fell off.
Oh, okay, right.
Sorry, sorry.
Right. Okay, so we're so close.
Is the monad this way?
Okay,
Is
I'm
the
going
monad
to
what?
like
Sorry.
kill myself on this monad question. It's not quite the space. Jakob?
No, I'm just thinking.
Okay.
I'll be back. Like, yeah. But
Yeah. Lee?
Well, might not be right, but I kind of see it as the kind of kind of a glue, creative glue that kind of holds everything and creates kind of everything. That's the only thing I can really kind of.
So the monad is kind of the creative glue.
That kind of.
And does it have a dimension to it?
No, it just.
Does it have a volume to it?
No.
Does it have anything?
Nothing
to it?
really. It's just more of a. It's kind of like a smudgy, kind of fluffy thing that.
Wait,
kind of,
wasn't yours fluffy pink? Yeah. Sorry, the monad fluffy pink.
That kind of.
Smooth.
You've got a smooth monad there.
Wow,
Okay.
there we go. I was just thinking fluffy because it kind of, when it gets near something, it kind of catches onto that. Yeah, kind of creates these.
So it's like a cloud and a clock issue again.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because then there is the first monad, the God monad, yeah?
The God monad.
Which all the monads came from in the first place.
That's right. And what do we call that today, in today's vernacular? Starts with a P. The God particle. So when you think of a particle, when you think of the God particle, does it have any depth? No. Does it have any shape? No. How does it work? How is it that this thing, what would be another word for this then?
I was sort of trying to think it might be like an essence,
So
but I think that is really wrong.
That is really wrong!
God particle's an event.
Oh, where is Lauren when we need her?
because
because
it happens,
happens.
but you can't catch the particle, you don't register the particle. You know that something happens, but nothing's caught or seized.
So
Or
close. So close. Really the closest so far.
The question.
So you find the segments, right, of it, the segment that it
Yes,
is.
good. Sorry, go on. You found the segment.
So it happens, yeah, the God particle happens. So it's not even that it is, it's like it happens.
Well, it is the
More, well, it is.
It is.
Yeah, but yeah, it is.
Okay, so forget that. I didn't mean to get you off track.
That was not that.
Isn't it because part of the Higgs boson from this is from reading the paper, so it's as scientific as I can get to this from. But, the passing from energy to matter. So when something gains mass, that's the Higgs boson action. Is that correct?
Okay. That's as far as we'll allow that without having proper study of it. Yeah.
So, is the, I'm asking Dave, who probably knows much more. Is the Higgs
resident
boson
physicist here.
causing it, or is the Higgs boson this passing?
Did you say passing or dispersing?
Passing.
Oh, passing.
Is passing.
I think it would be more passing because to explain it. the Large Hadron Collider does when it tries to make Higgs boson, it's because the universe is composed of a Higgs field. It's this field that encompasses everything, that gives particles matter. Well, it accounts for gravity. It allows, well, it stops everything from moving at the speed of light. And it's this invisible field thing that we can't touch, see, but it keeps us together, keeps everything together. And what the Large Hadron Collider does is it smashes these two protons together at extreme speeds, and at that moment of impact it produces an effect in the Higgs field which allows a Higgs boson, which make up the Higgs field, to sort of pop into reality for like an instance, and then it just pops back into the field, and so you're just left with this particle event. So
right, so it's a particle event, right? Okay, so very good. Did everybody get that? I mean, that's pretty good discussion. Now, park that for 1 second and think about the notion of the surface, the famous surface that we keep going on about, that we spent all last semester on, about the groundless grounds, this thing that has a groundless ground, the way in which an ontology can be established because it has some sort of field that has no structure to it, basically. Now that type of structure that has nothing to sit on, it just has itself, but itself is not sort of floating around without something. It has to happen because something either collides or there's some other matter that goes on, or non-matter. So it has nothing to it. It is able to exist only by virtue of the way it attaches itself. And this becomes a non-dimensional, or in fact, a multi-dimensional entity.
Is it light? To light? In the sense of
And how did you get there?
Flash light. In the beginning, there was light.
In the beginning, there was the word, for
There was
heaven's
the word,
sakes.
sorry. Sorry, in the beginning there was the word. But, yeah,
And then there was light.
Then,
That was like the third day, I think.
but that's obviously, yeah, got but it's to do with the dividing of it.
Yeah, so what is this thing about the segment particle? Okay, we're going to continue pushing this. Okay, let's try it again. If we were to say, how would we explain that something has meaning? What is our basic tools? One of the tools is the famous Hegelian method, which says that something has meaning because it forms a universal by virtue of the fact there's a thesis, antithesis that's taken together, one gets sublated, the other one comes up, creates the synthetic move, which has an immanent relationship, and then creates the ground. And it doesn't really go anywhere, but it talks about movement. That's one very serious version here. Another version, which is linked to that, is going to be the way in which Newton and the Newtonian move is happening. His notion of gravity is phenomenal because it's not a thing, gravity. It's not like something you can hold. It's a force. So the idea that one could think of this thing called a force, and then think of a thing called a force field, let's say, and then if you come up with a thing called a force field, is that spatial? The force field? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good, this was not a trick question. Okay, so it is spatial. But this force field is a weird spatial because it's not like a room, or it's not like a typical form of the ground. What makes that thing spatial? What makes the force field spatial?
The relations.
The relations that allow it to. How do you know you're in a force field?
Does it gather around something with mass, the force
Mm-hmm.
field?
And it produces mass. So let's pretend we have all seen the movie Gravity, which bizarrely won. I don't know how many people have seen this. It is unbelievable. It's like, all I kept thinking whenever I saw George Clooney was Nescafe. You know, it's like, it just reminded me of like the Nescafe ad, you know, 'cause he's like, hello, here's, you know, anyway. But they had very good special effects. When you're thinking about, have people seen the Gravity film? They're excellent, I love this class. Wow. Do you see any films ever? Yeah, okay, just not bad ones. Okay, I get that. Okay, sadly I saw it. But, all right, so I can't use that example. Think about the way in which forces operate. Because I think that that's going to be our helpful little way into this question of the monad. Because if a force field is actually spatial, but we know, as Mattia just pointed out, that this force field is made up of an infinitesimal amount of something. What did you say it was made up of? Waves, right?
Relationships.
Relationships, yeah. So it has these relationships. So it's the relationships that are the elements. They're not elements as such. So the key for you to try and break from is the notion that matter is like a segment. And to think of matter as a force or as a relation. Once you make that leap, we can discuss the monad. What?
I'm just speaking to myself.
Okay. Excellent. Once you can make the leap that the matter isn't this thing, or it's not just this thing, this matter, but it is profoundly relational, radically relational. It's a force field. The least, a force field that you cannot reduce past the, let's say the basic monad. Can you see that then? Can you see how a monad is like Diet Coke? Is that Diet Coke?
Yeah.
All right. That the monad, think of it as a force field that could be interrupting itself. Think about a surface in that way. You'll move into a different handling of time and space, because now it's going to be dealing with something about movement, about duration, about speed. Other elements are coming into this. What are you looking for? Okay. So, let's try and go with this. If in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God.
I wanted to say oops.
The word was oops. That's fantastic. Yes, and the Word was God. And in fact, the Word was actually two words. What would be the second word? Particle. So in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God particle. Okay, that's one word, let's say. Then maybe you can begin to see that the beginning doesn't last very long. So you get a sense of duration as like nano. But more importantly, that duration, the temporality of duration is also dimensional. Questions on that sentence?
Could you say it again, please?
Yes. It means that the temporal is also dimensional. So in the old time, when you were youngsters, as of about an hour ago, and you were thinking about time as tick, 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 that is, say, segments. And now the segment that's doing its little ticking, and doing its little move through space or through something, a field, that could be conceptualized as a marker, but it could also be conceptualized as something that mark is actually configuring shafts of things, like you said, light. That's why I was asking you how you got there. That's how you got there. So I mentioned that. So you have this relationship to time that is always already dealing with these monad. So now these surface relationships, these surface dimensions. One searches for the best way to put this without trying to sound ridiculous. So let's back up and try it again. We have the question of space as a platform, as a geography, as a 3D, as volume, as matter, this notion of space. And we have this notion of time, which marches forward, which indicates age, which has some sort of relationship. And why does anybody worry about these questions of space and time? Why should we as artists or philosophers or anything, what does that have to do with your work? Who cares about space and time? Why is this like even a problem, apart from Stuart, who's actually working literally on space, Joel things? Why worry about space and time?
Because we want to free ourselves, we want to leap through them.
Okay, that's one good reason. Yes, and with the pink fluff.
It was fur.
Oh, fur, sorry, pink fur.
Because we're all mortal, and we're obsessed with our death, and
So the relationship of space and time has something always to do with this relationship to death. That's what you're saying?
I think so, yeah.
So, and is the relationship to death having something to do with finite?
Yeah.
And is this something to do with finite also then something to do with infinite?
Yeah.
Okay, so is this relationship then suddenly around finite, infinite, that there's another way to determine this, or are we just sort of stuck in this way of thinking, well, dust to dust, whatever it is, whatever the sentence is, we all die, that is the feature of this room, it's a feature of all life, everyone dies, but gee, it would be so great to be in a different, I don't know, parallel universe. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, but I think there's always a searching for something else, for the infinite.
Yeah, but I was scared of death. We were talking earlier about souls and immortality of the soul. Soul is immortal in a way. If we accept that we have a soul, we don't accept that we have a soul. Do we really worry about time ending? But really,
yeah.
We actually celebrate time ending because we're going to the better place.
Yeah, or we're going to another body or something.
So there is most of the religions, which Leibniz can't avoid the thing that he actually spoke about it. That talks about moving into to another space, to another universe in a way.
But why is it okay?
So
let's
there
say
is something in us that doesn't end. Is there? I mean,
let's say that there is this whole question around mortality as the basis of all of your work. Let's say that is part of it. That's not the whole bit about why put the question of time and space on the agenda in a methodologies class on a PhD level for all of your work. Why would that have some kind of resonance for all of your work? That's the question. Because when you can begin to figure out the answer to that question is when it starts to make more sense as to why we're doing it at all, and it's not just a specialist move. That we're not just, that everybody now has to finally understand quanta, or they have to finally understand, I don't know what, the surface. Why do you think this matters?
Because we exist.
Okay, that's sort of the meta thing.
Because we're pinned down in all sorts of ways alongside or knitted in with space and time. It brings other oppressive hierarchies and...
Okay. I think I'm going to put this on, just put it on the table, hover. Because part of it has to do with how does one get a sense of what is real. And once you have a sense of what is real, technically, you can predict. Once you have a sense of the logic of something, assuming it has a logic, or a multitude of logics, you're able to move with that. So that, for example, your own work, making assumptions in your own work and then putting them out as a PhD student, which all of you will be hypothetically at this moment, one way or the other. When you're putting your work out, how do you know you're right? I mean, passion alone isn't enough. The fact that you really believe in it is like conviction, is very useful for war, but that's about it, really. Maybe some religions. How do you know that what you're working on matters, is significant? Why does this question of space and time allow you some mileage in staking a claim to what it is you're working on? And that elicited nothing else as well. Okay, so
I think it's partly to do with history, taking in other times as well. I think it's sort of referring backwards and forwards at the same time.
No, but it was a good try. And the reason I say that is because it does have something to do with the grittiness of history. Or maybe I'm just misunderstanding what you said, in the sense that what I heard was something that one has to understand all the different relationships of what's going on with space and time, but or I just have to.
What I mean is that everybody takes their own their own space, their own time with them, so that each moment is informed by so many other moments at the same time.
Your thesis that you're going to be working on for your PhD has to do with the way in which the curve has some relationship to transformation, to movement, to sexuality, and so on and so forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's you put that out as a position. How do you know that even makes sort of sense to go in and look at feminism, for example, from that perspective? How did you begin to think, yes, that makes sense, I'm going to go in that direction? What did you do? Name the steps. Can you throw out the steps that made it begin to make sense?
I don't know. I think because over and over, I look at the sort of curve of time and the spiraling motion and fractals, and I'm attracted to that over and over.
Okay.
So
yes, that's true. So you're going to be having something to do with that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Jakob.
You mentioned force as in the group. I'm thinking about more as a big gravity pull or something.
Okay.
Away. So it's not pushing monad away, just kind of you found the monad way. So it's kind of what I'm thinking, especially with the research like that. It's like you found the pull of the force in a way.
Okay.
The force and you found it's like some sort of road, or maybe you are even the force that pulls those things.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly you're pulling things that you encountered mostly randomly, because those are not also you can't say origins of your thesis, and you can't really say when it did appear.
Mm-hmm.
You sit and you read comic books, and then you watch the scary movie, and then you listen to Alanis Morissette, and you have a thesis about the influence of Alanis Morissette to the horror movies genre, and you kind of work that way, but you don't really do it consciously in a way. It doesn't happen consciously. There's a moment when it transforms into something conscious, when you become a force. There's this moment, I think, again we are like this one moment that something needs to go through and change, like something is the energy and then becomes a matter.
That's interesting.
So there's a moment about
Does
this.
that sort of then follow into the idea that it's not about knowing that you're right, it's about knowing that you don't know you're right. So, does that make sense? So it's about inquiring, about being human, about sort of that sort of progression of thinking.
So because you know you're writing, because, but it's like for me it's like you're finding the source in a way. You're kind of close to the bleed. Right? You're on an operating table. Sorry, for a lot of surgery programs. So just go straight away to the bullet hole, through and through. Bleeds today. And sorry, but you kind of need to follow the artery to find the bleed somehow. You follow the pulse of the artery to find the bleed, to find this
thing.
Mhm.
And I feel like this is what's happening
Yes,
in the PhD
yes,
thing.
yes, we're getting
You
warmer here.
get into art already, and there's a flow of monads, so there's a flow of energy around you, and you get to that, and you kind of follow it up in a way, but you do change it because it doesn't move without you. You need to move it as well.
Isn't that through
So
relations?
Like that's
like
relation,
intersections of relations of things happening in space and time that they move, and things like feminism or whatever, they have a relation, and that's how you can position yourself with the things might connect at a certain time or a certain point, or in relation to whatever you are in your.
I'm going to throw one other thing out to mix. Oh, okay, sorry.
Just a phrase that comes to mind for me is of our time.
Of our time. And what does that mean?
In the sense that...
Apart from it being a BBC program.
Sorry. Yeah. In the sense of, as a practitioner,
Getting warmer here.
our work, how do we know our work is, how we, I suppose you can put it, in some senses, to be of value, it must be of our time.
Okay.
And I don't quite know what I mean by that.
Are we not creating our time?
Okay.
That would be more the...
It is when you radicalise the relationship between time and space, you're changing habit. So if our time, our era is our customs and habits and traditions and how we do things, and then art shifts that, it jolts it to change it.
Is it to do with our technology then, our kind of making sense?
Techno, as in technology,
as in techno, as in making sense then.
Yes. So warm. Almost on fire here. It's excellent. So let's just slightly circle back to the Newtonian move. Or not even that, to make the suggestion that we're engaging, or that we're re-engaging, or we're somehow playing with these questions of so-called space and time, is to invoke the senses. This is absolutely critical, and you need to understand, and you were getting very warm to it, except it's not that it has to be of our time. In the sense that the way in which this is being laid out here, you want to understand how you're a practice-led research as opposed to taking a rational approach and thinking through a model and then putting it on your work, then you must understand what it is to think through space and time in a way that no longer assumes platform as one type of space and marker as the form of time. If you can jettison that out, if you can follow the Leibnizian scenario, you'll begin to understand how reason, as it were, artistic reason, for lack of a better way of putting it, a practice-led logic is a logic that privileges the senses because there's something else being put forward, this relationship between space and time. Dane.
I was just going to go to some of the points in the letters.
Some other points.
Just some of the points which might work with.
Okay, right. What page?
In Leibniz, second paper, it's page...
Second letter, you mean?
Yeah, page 4.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
Page?
Page 4.
Point
Okay.
4. I'll read it right now. Clarke supposes that the mere presence of the soul is sufficient to make it aware of what happens in the brain.
Wait, go on.
The verb phrase to be aware of translates...
Wait, sorry, I can't be found it. Where, sorry again?
Page 4.
Page 4,
What,
yeah.
what number?
Yeah.
Oh, here,
Number
number
4.
2.
Number 4.
Number 4, oh,
Number
sorry.
4, page 4.
Okay, got it, okay.
Okay, so here, Clarke supposes that the mere presence of the soul is sufficient to make it aware of what happens in the brain. And the verb phrase to be aware of translates s'apercevoir de. Clarke always translates this by perceive, and that's wrong. In these papers, Leibniz hardly abuses percevoir equals perceive, but does not. But not once does he speak of what God perceives. It is always what God senses, is aware of, or once discerns. But this is what just Malebranche and all the Cartesians deny, and they are right to do so. For X to represent what happens in Y, mere presence isn't enough. There has to be something that explains what X and Y have to do with each other. Either one acts on the other, or both are acted on by a single cause. Of course, mere presence isn't enough. According to Newton, a region of space is intimately present to the body, that it contains and that has the same shape and size as it does. Would he infer from this that space is aware of what happens in a body and remembers it when the body has moved on? And when it comes to the presence of the soul, the trouble is even worse. The soul is indivisible, it has no size. So if we try to tell a story about its presence in the body, it will be present only at a point. So how could it be aware of what happens outside that point? I claim to be the first person to show how the soul becomes aware of what happens in the body.
Excellent. Can you explain what you just read?
So, well, he's saying that, well, the Clarke and Newtonian view of the soul just being there in the present is enough for it to understand what's happening around it, that gives it an awareness to be able to understand what goes on around it. But Leibniz is saying that that's wrong, because a mere presence, just being there, isn't enough. It doesn't take into account an awareness of the senses, or use of the senses to understand, to bring together what's going on in the present.
So there's no intention.
No, that's what he's saying.
And that's so important about the work of art. Or to put it slightly differently, when the work of art discloses a view, sort of the in-your-face view, it ceases to be art. Right? Yes. And so so one of the reasons one thinks about this relationship of time and space in this manner is because it breaks the Cartesian rationalist logic, and I think Tamsin was the one that said it frees up a certain something, it frees up the senses. But it doesn't just free them up so that you're now off with your senses going, yeah, touchy-feely, blah, 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 but that it's also guiding. It does something to create a logic of some kind. What was the other one you were going to read out?
It was the third letter, point 4. Oh, points 4 to 8. No, I'll just do point 4.
Third letter, points 4.
Page 9.
Yeah.
For my part, I have said several times that I hold space to be something merely relative, as time is, taking space to be an order of coexistences, as time is an order of successions. For space indicates an order of things existing at the same time, considered just as existing together, without bringing in any details about what they are like. When we see a number of things together, one becomes aware of this order among them. Leibniz says that space indicates alternative possibility, in terms of possibility, an order of things, etc. Meaning? So, with monads, I think, which one is it? I think it's something like point 19 of the monadology talks about how monads never go out of existence. They have a force in themselves, but in the Newtonian view, force in the universe dissipates, it disappears. Things go out of existence, and God has to sort of wind up the universe again, has to sort of fix it, fix the holes and add extra force in. But Leibniz is saying that God doesn't need to do any of that, because nothing goes out of existence. And that's the same in terms of possibility and reality as well. Possibilities don't go out of existence, they're always actual in a certain sense. Like he says how God could have created the universe any way he wanted, but he chose the one which is most perfect, and he had to choose the one which is most perfect. But that doesn't mean that all the other possibilities he could have chosen to create aren't still possible, but he just couldn't have chosen them. So those sort of possibilities as monads still exist, but they aren't real in a certain sense, but they are real. Okay. And that idea of possibility and getting meaning via possibilities, I think, allows you to redefine what is real if you can understand how a possibility has a sort of a reality and an existence in itself, and how to find a method to, if there is a different possibility you'd like to bring forward, how to bring that about, and how the one reality which is at the moment is just as possible as any of the others.
Right, okay, so how does something become decidable? Because if everything is possible at any given time, how does it become what it becomes? How does one become what one is? To quote, or to misquote Nietzsche. How does that happen?
Well, Leibniz puts it down to the existing together of monads.
So it has something to do with the order of things. So the order of things is involved with this, which is a Foucauldian move, I mean, centuries later. Okay, I'll go back to the sequel. This is dying, my computer's running out of steam. Here, I'm going to give you guys this. So you can look at this. Here, we go to okay, take 1 second here. So let's recap then about okay, so it's going to be one of those, monology and then the other things, yeah. Okay. What are we getting out of this now? Are we getting any further, or are people just making fantastic drawings? What are you getting out of this? Anything?
Okay, I'm reading this book, Julian Rogers, The Necessity of Errors, it's called.
Necessity of Errors, okay.
Yeah. And that's kind of the moment, the first quote we read.
Okay.
This moment of something cracking down and something sensuous coming out of it in a way that it's not like a wave of sensuous, it has something to it. And there is a chapter there of how error creates knowledge, basically, and the necessity of error for the discovery of truth.
Are you saying E-R-O-S or E-R-R-O-R?
E-R-R-O-R.
Okay, how error.
Error.
Not arrows.
Not errors.
Ah,
Errors.
okay, right.
Error is. I can't. Jeez.
No, that's right. Say transubstantiation.
Errors, that's the same.
That's right.
No, in this way, it's the errors as in mistakes. Not
right.
Exactly not as a mistake, because that's what I'm doing, because I'm trying to figure out what the mistake is. And I thought it's an error, but it's not. I think it's something different.
So what is an error?
But, well, he actually. He goes very dialectic based.
He being?
Julian Roberts?
John
Roberts. John Roberts. He teaches at Wolverhampton.
Okay.
University of Wolverhampton. And he kind of speaks about dialectics for most parts. When he talks about politics, error in politics, error in science, error in all parts. Then he goes to art, and he kind of has nothing to say really. I shouldn't be saying that, sorry camera, but except like he goes into that the necessity actually that art is the only thing that that all the task is to deny itself, to destroy itself in a way, to question itself. That art, philosophy, all that is the point of it is to question itself. It's the only one that doesn't really aim to something.
You mean philosophy, or?
Well, art and philosophy speaks about too, but I have like
okay.
about it. It's not a very good book. Like, it's not that good. I'm not really using it that much.
Okay.
It was a waste of £9, but.
Right. Okay.
You want to read
well,
that.
no, there is a moment like when you talk about the cracking, and there's this moment of like this happening and something sensuous coming out of it, and something leaking out in a way that it needs, but it leaks out in the form of, not in the form of something, but it leaks out, not, it doesn't burst, kind of leaks out in a way, and it's kind of this.
Well, let's go back to let's go back to the third paper. I think it's an important point here. If we go to what is Clarke actually being used? He's being used as a foil here. So what is the foil? You know, if you go to number 1, you know, he's saying in the usual. What's that?
I just got it on my phone because Gay very kindly forwarded it to me. So it's
Uh-huh. Does anybody have a larger version that you guys can look at?
I've got a paper version there. You have to.
No, you'll need it, really. No,
I've got this.
I'm fine with this, honestly. It's good.
Okay, Lee, you want it?
Yes, I haven't got. I've got my phone.
Okay, great. All right, back comes back. So he says here, on number 1, he starts to attack the use of mathematics as a way to understand the senses. Now, this is a very timely attack because people like Badiou, and not just Badiou, like Gambin, and a whole new set of philosophers right now, are putting forward the whole question of math as a way of understanding the logic. In fact, speculative realism is based on this as well. And this is an attack on this, where he's saying, whereas metaphysical principles concern more general notions such as cause and effect, and he's basically trying to get into this problem that's going on. He says here on number 3, so there we are. These gentlemen maintain that space is a real absolute being, which leads them into great difficulties. Here is just one example. Here's just one. It seems that if there is such a being as real absolute space, it must be eternal and infinite. That's why some people have believed that space is God itself, or one of its attributes, mainly the attribute of immensity. But space doesn't fit with God because space has parts. And then he, just as was being read for my part, I've said several times that I hold space to be something merely relative. Okay, now if you go down to number 5, as for those who imagine that space is a substance, or at least that it is something absolute, I have many demonstrations that show them to be wrong, but just now I'll use only one of these, that the one that Clarke has opened the door to in the section on his paper that I'm discussing. The demonstration argues that if space were an absolute being, something would be the case for which there couldn't possibly be a sufficient reason, which conflicts with my axiom, and thus implies that space is not an absolute being. Here's how the argument goes. Now, you want to read this? Because your voice is much more clear than mine. Number 1.
Number 1. Space is something absolutely uniform. One point of space doesn't differ in any way from any other point of space. I mean that it doesn't differ absolutely, i.e. apart from differences in what bodies there are at the 2 places. Add to that the thesis that I am arguing against. 2. Space is something in itself besides the order of bodies among themselves, i.e. space is absolutely real.
So this is the point he's arguing against. To be clear, it's written in a kind of, it's translated in a kind of crummy way. So the first point is that he's saying something about there being an absolute uniform, but by uniform he doesn't mean that they're literally point for point the same, but that they don't differ in any significant way. Doesn't differ absolutely, i.e. apart from differences in what bodies there are at the 2 places. Add to that thesis this to which I'm arguing against. Space is something in itself. I'm arguing against this. Besides the order of bodies amongst themselves, space is absolutely real. I'm arguing against the absolutely real. Okay.
From 1 and 2, it follows that 3, God could not possibly have had a reason for putting the material universe in space in this way, rather than in some other way that retained the same spatial relations of bodies to one another. E.g., rather than rotating the world so as to switch west to east. That would conflict with the principle of sufficient reason, so it can't happen. So premise 2 is false. QED.
What does QED mean?
Quod erat demonstrandum.
Well done!
I don't know what that means.
And what does that mean? What does QED mean?
It means sort of as it's by.
Yeah, yeah, ipso facto, or, you know, this is how it is. Yeah, yeah, very well done, yeah, very good. Yes?
But if we replace to by to star, space is nothing but an order or set of relations among bodies, so that in the absence of bodies, space is nothing at all except the possibility of placing them. Then we don't get the conclusion 3, because the supposed two states, the universe where it is and the universe rotated through 180 degrees, are not two states but one. They are la même chose, the same thing. We have the illusion of difference coming from the fanciful supposition that space is a real independent entity, but in reality the supposed two states are indistinguishable, so they are really one. So the question, why did God choose this one rather than that, doesn't arise.
Okay, how do you hear that? Does that make sense? So a different way of putting it is that the question of what is going on is simply the question of understanding what is. There's no why to the what is. There just is the that of the is. The that it happens. So just the thing on the time, and you can just read on. Number 6.
6. The same thing holds true for time. Suppose someone asks, why didn't God create everything a year sooner than he did? Sees that this has no answer and infers that God has made a choice where there couldn't possibly be a reason for his choosing that way rather than some other. I say that his inference would be right if time was some thing distinct from things existing in time, or events occurring in time. For in that case it would indeed be impossible for there to be any reason why events shouldn't have occurred in exactly the order they did, but at some different time. But what that argument really proves is that times, considered without the things or events, are nothing at all, and that they consist only in the successive order of things and events. On that view of what time is, the supposed two states of affairs, the world exactly as it is and the world as it is except for having started a year sooner, don't differ at all, are indiscernible, are really just one.
So, does this make sense? And who said yes? Oh, yeah. A lot of yeses here. Can you explain what you're hearing there?
Well, I'm not sure if I can, but what I got is time is changing.
Okay, and
like it's changing itself. So
it's changing itself. Yeah. Okay, and so how come? In what way does that then make sense of this whole question of space-time and just, you know, the fact that time isn't absolute and space isn't absolute? How can you push that a little bit further?
I must say that it's clearer to me the time bit rather than the.
Okay, well, explain the time bit then again.
Is that time is not a thing?
Right.
Is the changing?
Okay, so let's say time is the changing.
Yeah. So doesn't make any sense to argue why God didn't create the universe a year before, because there was no time before the start of the existence, meaning the start of the possibility of changing. So
good. So can you, big leap here, can you take that comment and link it to your work? Link it to the question you're asking about the way in which vision is operating.
well, I can just say that it's just a matter of relations, and therefore there's no fixed point, pivotal thing. It's just a hub of relations.
Okay, that's good up to this point. I mean, it's a good first attempt at that. Can you say something with respect to your work then? How this relation between this relational time and relational space and relational to time and space, how do you read that through your own work?
Well, to me, especially the one about time is the way time is imagined or represented. I mean, what comes out of this paragraph on time, paragraph 6, is that the absolute a priori time as it is postulated by the Newtonian movement, which we inherited and so forth, is a specialized version of time, where we assume that time is all laid out in front of us and then we are going to happen along its line. While, as Alberto said very clearly, if time is inherited by change, as long as there is no change or there is no time happening, vice versa, as soon as differentiation begins, then one can start counting time, whichever parameter one needs to for calculating that, for counting that. One can going back to the discussion we had earlier about what was being said earlier about the fact that we die at a certain point. If we were immortal, we could do whatever we need or like to do tomorrow. We end up never doing it because we can always do tomorrow. So the infinity of time would destroy the economy of values that we use in our life to get by or to decide. So the problem that is at the back of Leibniz discussion here is not simply the indiscernibles that are actually just one thing that he uses as a logical tool to make that, but the very fact that if everything is available, if all the possibilities, as they this kind of modality, are open at the same time, they are co-present, there is no possibility of choosing. So only this circumspect to the question of the modality is only a certain curve across those possibilities permits the distribution of the present of the senses and for action.
Brilliant. So can you repeat that? Because that is the crux of what we're doing. You got there. Now we need everybody else to get there. So can you just repeat what you just said?
The whole thing to the beginning? Yeah.
Well, what part did you guys get lost at? The beginning? Yeah, let's go start with the co-presence, because in that notion of co-present is already embedded a certain kind of spatiality. Co-present, the word co and presence implies something to do with space. So now go on. So you have co-present of time.
Yeah, well, the image of being immortal, it's quite useful in this case, because really try to imagine that there would be no limit. You're not aging. You don't need to do anything, because if you are immortal, even not paying your rent or not washing up or not feeding yourself, it doesn't really matter. At the same time, pursuing something that is fun and enjoyable doesn't really matter because you can do it later. So the constant deferral becomes a desert where nothing ever happens because you can always do it later, or at least a desert of complete boredom.
Or everything happens because it.
Yeah, but it loses value because you can have it again. So even the most desirable
Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
For those of you that have seen that film. Anybody seen that film?
Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go.
And it also, precisely staying with that, it also loses its ethical weight, because you can do something entirely wrong, but then you'd never be punished for it. And it's not even this eternal cycle of repetition, it's the very fact that there is time for it forever. Now, that is a complete smoothness. There is nothing to hold on to. And is all possibilities. I can do this, I cannot do it. I can do that, I cannot do it. I can do the third thing or the nth thing. It doesn't matter. Because I can always do it later. There will always be time for having that option as well realized. So it's a paralyzed situation. It's the first step is never possible. And as such is unreal to me. This is why I read it, or the way I read it, how I understand it. It is the total co-presence of possibilities exists on a metaphysical level is not for us.
Mhm.
It's what God for Leibniz can think, but not for the however, any selection among these, any curve among these that touches some points of this infinite field, instead is one distribution, is a set of dimensions, better I would say is dimensionality.
Mhm.
So we don't even have to count how many dimensions we've got there.
That's right.
And that's what the monad is, which is adimensionality, or a string of instruction on how to behave. Like whatever we have that doesn't cut the space, leaving something outside, but shapes it.
Mhm.
So there are,
So in other words, so in that sense, the dimension can be, in this case, the shaper,
Yes.
as it were, or it can be the force field,
Yes.
which is also shaping. But I mean, one, I think you get it because one is sort of used to hearing gravity as a force field. It's easier, in a certain sense, to bring it to mind. I think. I mean, if it's not, then just get rid of that image. But it's just a question of what's being asked of you right now is to let go of your Cartesian rationality, and to do this not by going insane, which is what often is suggested in the literature, particularly in art, that one has to stop reason and stop being so reasonable and go to irrationality. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with go out of the whole time-space conundrum that's been set up with Euclidean and Newtonian geometry, which forecloses a certain kind of logic based on the senses. So that's really what we're trying to deal with here. That's why this is so important to get a sense of, literally, to get your hands on, because what's being asked of you is to think dimensionally as opposed to either or, contradictory, universally, and so on. If you can think dimensionally, which is a little bit easier to do these days because we have the internet, and that makes sense that you could think that if I broke open this computer, there's nothing in it. There's some, it's not that it's dimensions in there, but we know that we have like a lot of files. We have, on our PDF books, we must have about 50 books, 100 books, something like that, but obviously there's no book in there. So the fact that the computer allows one to understand a different presencing is what's at issue here. And now, sadly, with the computer, we're still dealing with analog and digital and so on and so forth, so we're not really getting out of Cartesian logic per se, but just to help you get to the next level. What were you going to say?
Well, I add something that then leads in a direction. To me, is that what I'm talking about seems extremely important and very interesting. That associated with thinking time and space as absolute rather than as dimensions, but as adimensionality, as I was describing in the model, goes the distinction of aesthetic and epistemology.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously...
Wait, say it very slow, because people are listening, but they're tired. So you have to, no, seriously, so you say it very slow.
Is the field, or the science, or whatever, the discipline, that looks at what comes to the senses.
Mm-hmm.
What reaches the threshold of perception, appearance, what appears
Mm-hmm.
to the senses. And therefore defines what is material, and it has been associated with art,
Mm-hmm.
because art was a material practice for quite a while, all material, and therefore aesthetic and art is contained within aesthetics,
Mm-hmm.
and it's always very problematic. It was the demonstration that Shivon asked me, and asked me, what do? Do you paint? That's always what happens. The first thing that one is asked, as if.
Don't feel bad about that, but you do paint.
As if, but as if that would be the only option available. Now, I think that if one realizes that space-time are the dimensions we are in, very useful dimensions we use, immediately one notices that the limit becomes the material to work with, the dimension becomes the material to work with. And to me, then the very distinction between aesthetic and epistemology becomes extremely important, because then one can say, actually, I can maybe still use paint to question the meaning I give to art as a practice, rather than thinking that first art happens and then inside that, in the smaller box.
Inside that you have a technology called paint.
Yes.
Yeah.
And vice versa, once I think is, maybe here I have a bit of an intuitive leap that I won't be able to explain fully. I start thinking that there are entirely different dimensions that are also crossing this time-space stage. I've said another time that I think that certainly in the trade centers has shown us that desire and capital are dimensions that are always attached to a given. There is no way to take them out. But then there are other dimensions that can be more local. And here I give an example. A few years ago I made a piece of work where I am part of a collective blog. It's about literature. And as a blog, the comments are open to any post. And looking at it from outside, I realized that what was happening in the blog, mostly the real surface of the blog, was posting and commenting. It didn't really matter what was being posted and what were the comments. And there was a post by writers and comments by a literary public. So I thought, this is what I'm going to work with. So I wrote some fake poems. I can't write poems in my life, I just made one. And then I posted them saying, well, I am not the professional artist, the professional writer, but you are the professional public. Give me corrections to the comments and raise this to the professional art. So I found that that relationship between posts and comments was the dimension I could work with. So in an entirely different way, but still sensual, because it wasn't transparent. It has there's a thickness that.
Okay, so that's where we're going with this. That's what I want you to understand, because I'm going to ask both Kate, so I'm preparing you to ask you this question, about how one understands senses. So far, the senses that we're talking about here really don't sound very sensuous. Or maybe they do. Maybe what the senses are dealing with is this question of thickness, thinness, no edges, this kind of thing. But what are we talking about? Like, for example, in your work, Jacqueline, about how, just looking at Kristeva, how would Kristeva talk about the senses? Or okay, well, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Who?
I left the house at 7:30.
Okay, that's right, that's right. How are the senses often spoken about when we're thinking about artworks? Kate, you want to take a stab at this? Like, how would Freud start, or Lacan start addressing questions of the senses?
The visual I'm looking at is sort of like a dominant, like a scopic regime.
It's like a scopic, okay.
It's traditionally a dominant.
Yeah.
In
So
arts and
the gaze, G-A-Z-E, yeah. Okay, so that becomes, but how does Freud address the relation between the intellect and the senses? Or Lacan, either one? Desire, right. And can you push that a little bit further? Because have you said anything about desire?
Yes, that is an inevitable dimension of.
But okay, let me try slightly differently. There's no intention in what you're saying. But with desire, the way in which desire operates in a psychoanalytic move, there is, maybe intention's too strong a word, but there's some form of a drive that goes on that pushes the subject to act or not act, or to act in certain ways. That is not happening in this argument. Or are you saying it does happen in this argument?
No, it's not.
No, this is why I'm trying to get to see how radically different the notion of the senses is being put forward here, as opposed to in a Lacanian move. In the Lacanian move, there is the moment of the symbolic, the imaginary, the real, and the way in which that combines, also thinking through the unconscious and so on, to create very specific notions of what becomes the real. And that, in the sensuousness of the Lacanian move, is bound up with the unconscious, it's bound up with language, it's bound up with very specific bodily relationships to repression, right? But here we're talking about senses and rationality that seems to be completely otherworldly, literally.
I think Leibniz is talking about autonomy a lot. This business about bodies pushing and sort of manoeuvring and the, you know, one having impact on another. And he talks about contingencies.
Mm-hmm.
Now to me, that's what Lacan's talking about when he talks about the real. The difference between metaphor and autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
So the linguistic regime is the metaphorical.
Yes, metaphor, yes.
But the real is metonymic, and I think Leibniz is talking about that, which is.
I agree with that. Yes. Yes, but the push is, where do the senses come in this? Where does the operational move of the senses come?
They're not from the ego. They're
No.
from, they're from the id.
It's not the rational in that sense.
The id is the real. It's linguistic structures work backwards because they're patterns. You can only see them retroactively, but the senses work forwards because you experience them in real time. So in the real, in the Lacanian real, you haven't got images, you haven't got the imaginary, you haven't got words. You've just got pure senses and nothing else. It's literally your skin.
So are we saying then, are we, meaning you, saying that Lacan is, and Leibniz are saying the same thing, or they're saying something totally different? You're saying the same thing.
Yeah, but.
And you're saying?
But I don't know Lacan enough. What I find interesting and extremely important is that when we're talking about art, there has been a very subtle confusion between the senses, aesthetic, and the epistemological field that is supposed to organize them. Because the senses in art, the senses at this point are no longer only the five senses. Art has always dealt with the sensual, which is a broader concept, because it's what is that approach that finds, I don't like this Lyothardian expression, but finds thickness where in epistemology would find thinness. And the example I gave of that piece of work with the blog is because I found in what would have otherwise would have been taken as the rules of the blog, the laws that run it, something that is transparent, that hasn't got any place in itself, but just organizes something else. I found space there to alter it, to twist it just a bit in order to raise questions and alter the meaning of what it was supposed to do. So in that sense, it had a thickness, where instead, it's like somebody who writes a poem finds with language not just a communication tool, but a whole space of resonances, I think, that don't mean anything directly, but evoke so much precisely because they have been widened rather than just being used as a line from A to B. And the problem with art, and the problem with separation between aesthetic and epistemology, is that it is denying this possibility of finding the sensual beyond the senses, and therefore keeps art as, well, you're not able to do, you paint, but the most one can make a sculpture, and then one has to define very tight discipline as installation artist or performance artist, as in that it imposes that one finds a medium, and the medium must be material and is always a carrier for a meaning, while instead the two things are completely flat, not even flat upon each other, they are the generating space of that.
Okay, I'm gonna, yes.
Is it then what the artist is doing is the question? Okay, is the artist trying to bring together the senses and the moment to create the sensual?
Is the artist trying to bring together the senses and the moment to create the sensual? Not to bring together, to inhabit the limit.
Yes, but also the senses and the monad shouldn't be separated like that. Okay, as long as you're all right with that. We're not talking about two different entities. All right, now, I am going to call time on this because you guys look absolutely wiped out for a variety of reasons. I'm sure that all makes sense. So we have about 10 minutes, or maybe 7 minutes, but anyway, what I'd like to know is next week, do you want to move past Leibniz? Or shall we not move past Leibniz? And if we don't move past Leibniz, what do you want to get involved with? And if we do move past Leibniz, what do you want to get involved with? Any takers?
I feel like I'm just about starting to get to grips with Leibniz.
Does that mean you
I'd
want
like
to stay with it?
him just a little bit longer.
Okay,
So would I.
okay.
For me, it's the monad and the scripto inferior for my research. I'm kind of thinking monad and scripto inferior.
Does this mean that you want to stay with this?
Being in this entity, this weird entity and the surface kind of thing. And that's what I'm interested in.
Okay.
Because that's what I'm kind of, from the point of view of my research, that's what I'm thinking about a little bit.
Okay, so let's
Could use another look at that.
let's reread the letters because they are very helpful. Reread the letters. Dane can attempt to re-give his talk. And I think, Kate, if you want to make a comment about metonymic in Lacan, I think that might be interesting for people. Because then you'll get a sense, what I'm trying to get you to think through. The general questions on offer here are really why is it, or what is it about space stroke time that matters for your theses? That's really the key here.
There is a lecture of Chaitin on simplicity in Leibniz. It's an hour long. I believe we have it on the Dropbox. Otherwise, I can put it there.
Yeah, put it there. It's YouTube.
Something like that.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's a video. It's not something to read.
And it's quite clear. I mean, don't be scared because he's talking about mathematics, but there are no formulas involved.
That's great. Just ignore that.
It's very, one can follow it. If I can follow it, it's mathematics, not. So
great.
It helps a lot understanding what a monad function is.
Can we ask for you to put that on the Dropbox
Yes,
if it's not there?
If it isn't there by tomorrow, send
Chaitin,
me.
yes, Chitin, Gregory Chaitin.
Discourse on simplicity. So there's a lecture given as part of a wider course, so it doesn't have a title itself.
I mean, you have to pat yourselves on the back on one level. This is really difficult to get outside of a Cartesian mode. It is tougher than you think. And you've done very well to insist, maybe you're just all masochist and you just really just want to keep beating yourselves up, which is fine. But you're doing very well because we're so close to cracking this, so I'm really pleased that you want to continue with it. That's great. Okay, see you next week.